Malice Mizer.
Ah, Japan, land of the rising sun, home of anime, creators of sushi, the world's leading panzer tank enthusiasts.
And with a fucking 8-centimeter rocket up their ass, a real man fights a panzer at close range, taking fire from the cute little panzer. Fucking adorable, like a puppy.
Japan is a powerhouse when it comes to art and entertainment, spawning many unique and influential genres of film, animation, and of course, music. So it's no surprise good old Nippon would be the birthplace of one of music's most interesting and experimental scenes, that being visual kei. A musical scene not defined by its sound, but by its aesthetic. Hence, you can have a band like Deviloof sit next to Plastic Tree, all in the same genre. But don't let that fool you. Visual kei is no slouch in the music department, and is one of the most diverse and variety-rich genres you could ever explore. And today, I want to talk about one of its most influential pioneers, a band whose look and sound would go on to serve as inspirations for thousands of artists and amass an eternally loyal following. So let's talk about the one, the only, Malice Mizer. The first incarnation of the band was formed during the summer of 1992, after guitarists Cozy and Mana left their previous group, Montanero. They were quickly joined by vocalist Tetsu, drummer Gaz, and bassist Yuki. The lineup, aside from the vocalist and drummer, would remain consistent throughout most of the band's career. The name Malice Mizer was chosen as the band felt it represented them best. The word malice, taken from the phrase, nothing but a being of malice and tragedy, and the word miser being defined as a meaning-grasping person. Though this did clash with the group's later aesthetic, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The group quickly recorded an instrumental demo tape entitled Sans Logique, the name being a nod to famous French pop singer Mylène Farmer and her song of the same name. Sans Logique is a curious little demo, and for a long time it was hard to find, but now you can listen to the remaster of it on YouTube. The sound of the EP introduced the band's signature sound, fusing dark wave, heavy metal, and goth rock. Aside from some admittedly terrible production and an overuse of reverb, the demo itself is a great starting point for the band and showcases a lot of their technical chops and songwriting talent right from the word go. With the demo being instrumental, it allows for one of the band's most defining characteristics to take center stage, and that is their twin guitars technique. Typically, when a band has two guitarists, one would handle the lead section, while the second would be handling more of a rhythm style of playing. But in Malice Mizer's case, both guitarists play lead, giving the music a much more busy sound and creating an almost polyphonic effect. After the release of Sans Logique, the drummer Gaz would opt to leave the band. With his departure came Kami though, who would stay with the band for the remainder of their discography. And it was after this that the band finally entered the studio to write their debut full-length album. In early 1994, Malice Mizer entered the studio to write and record their first album, Memoire, the only record to feature original vocalist Tetsu before his departure shortly after the re-release of the album later that year. Memoire was a new direction for the band compared to its predecessor. Memoire also saw the birth of one of the band's other signature elements, and that's the synth violins, cellos, and toy organs, giving the music a much more Baroque influence. Now, unlike my typical retrospectives on bands where I try to take a deep dive into the lyrics to the standout tracks, that isn't so easy with Malice Mizer since only a handful of their popular songs have actually been translated, at least that I could find. That being said, the album starts with the song Memoire, an intro track that sets the mood of the music to come, with a distinctly melancholic yet horror-tinged sound, something Mana remarked as being influenced by Italian horror films. This is quickly followed by Memoire in Sky, an epic gothic-themed track that shows off the wonderful vocal chops of Tetsu. The entire song has a strong and powerful feeling to it. The following track is dedicated to the Agent C, a brooding track that feels like a combination of Rush and Bucktick. Up next is the song Whispers in the Afternoon. This song has a very soft, almost jazz-like sound to it. It's something that definitely comes out of left field. This track is just a reprieve though, before we jump back into the darkness with the following song, Enchanted in Rome. This is probably my favorite song off the album and feels like the most cohesive track the band had produced to that point. Though it's closely tied with Seraph, which is the original ending track of the album and definitely lives up to its name. The title is a reference to a specific category of angels, and that's what the track is, angelic. Although with the DX reissue, the band added a new song entitled Baroque. A great song, but something that would have fit better if it came before Seraph. That being said, the song is still worth listening to. Memoire served as a very strong intro for the band and really set the stage of what would come later, but not without trouble. But before we get into that, we need to talk about somebody else. One of Japan's most iconic and influential rock stars is a man named Gackt, or Gakuto Oshiro, who started off his career not as a singer, but as a dealer for a casino. Although this didn't last very long, after a very influential meeting with a businessman, he was inspired to find a new purpose in life. And from here, Gackt started to pursue music. He originally wanted to become a drummer and briefly formed a band called Kane's Feel, but when they couldn't procure a vocalist, he decided to make the transition to become one himself. Kane's Field was very short-lived though. Once Gackt discovered Malice Mizer in 1995, he moved to Tokyo to audition to become the band's vocalist. And from here, the rest is history. And even after his tenure with the band, unlike most singers whose careers fall into shambles, Gackt would break this cycle by not only becoming one of Japan's most famous solo artists, but also by entering the anime industry as a voice actor, voicing characters in famous shows like Shiki, Dragon Age, and even Trickster. After Tetsu's departure from the band, Malice Mizer entered their first hiatus, going inactive for a little over a year, though in the summer of 1995, they would recruit Gackt to be their new frontman. Shortly after, the band would enter the studio once again to begin work on their second album, Voyage sans Retour. With their new vocalist joining the band, they would shift their aesthetic to what would become their defining look, toning down the dark, gothic look and opting for a more colorful and French-influenced appearance. Their sound was no exception either, bringing back many of the heavy metal elements omitted from their previous record, though this would end up contrasting with the greater use of Baroque sounds and string synthesizers, giving the record a much more art rock sound as opposed to their previous focus on goth music. Voyage sans Retour would also see the lyrics taking a specific theme this time around, a vampire love story of sorts where our protagonist expresses his feelings about the human world. All these changes would result in a big boost of popularity and sales for the band, landing them a major record deal for their next album. But before I get any more ahead of myself, let's talk about the album. The record starts off with another atmospheric intro before dropping us headfirst into the dark and cinematic Transylvania. A stark contrast to all the material that they released before this, showing massive growth in the band's songwriting abilities. The next song on the album, A Piece of Broken Recollection, is one that shows off Malice Mizer's heavier side and going on to become one of the classics in the band's discography. One of my favorite songs the band ever created, though, is the fourth track off the album, titled Premier Amour. The track has a very whimsical and sweet sound to it. The instrumentation is led by some airy synths and Baroque elements, all topped with Gackt's lush voice. This is also one of the few songs that have been translated. The lyrics tell of Gackt's feelings of longing for a past love in a very beautiful and poetic way.
Amid the fading sunlight, I called your name, and until you float away forever into the sky, I forever only saw you.
The track that follows is a dreamy and cute little song called Itsuwari no Musete, a song that reminds me a lot of the game Klonoa. As the song plays, though, it grows into a much bigger and more epic track. The last song of note I will talk about is Claire Melody of the Moon, a dreamy and romantic song. This track's lyrics are deeply poetic and reflect the music perfectly.
Amidst white lights of the lamps, in the night sky behind my closed eyelids, my endless dreams enfold me and carry me to the sky. I'll grant the wish you made on a star while bathed in the light of the moon, for only you to hear, among stars like sepias, though I repeat the magic words, I can't see you.
Voyage sans Retour is a fantastic album, and given its massive jump in maturity and the unique nature of the band's sound and image, it's no surprise they would be picked up by Columbia Japan shortly after its release. And here we are, the band's most well-known and iconic album, Merveilles, the 1990 masterpiece that brought Malice Mizer to the Japanese mainstream and even saw them gain some fans in the West. Recorded a little over a year after the release and touring cycle of Voyage sans Retour, the band would continue to refine their sound, bringing in more elements of synth-pop and even industrial music. This time around, the album follows less of a story in favor of a broad theme, taking place in a fairy tale world with the protagonist jumping through different eras of time. Now, let's talk about the music. Unlike the previous records, Merveilles skips the intro and goes straight in with the track Psionikis. And yes, I know I butchered the way you say that word. The track focuses on the Baroque elements, giving the song a much more haunting and horror-esque sound. But I'd be lying if I said this track was as good as the one that plays next. Bel Air, one of the band's most well-known songs, and when you listen to it, it's no mystery as to why. The track shows off the polyphonic guitar technique the band is famous for in a heavy metal-focused track. The contrast between the soft and heavy sections of the song creates one dynamic, unified sound unlike any other.
Expanse of the sky and my memories floating by, you gaze back at me and smile. Until the end, I reach out my arms to you, and in a dwindling voice, pray that this is reality.
These lyrics showcase the main theme of the album, those being love and longing. Though with the next track, we see a very different theme take hold.
Magical or merriment, communion with Nimrod. Take off your clothes and I'll offer a prayer to your prostate. From magical or merriment, communion with Nimrod. If I grasp you just once, you can no longer run away. We will join with everything in the Star of David.
Due to YouTube's hate from, well, how shall we say it, more based comments, I can't really talk about the lyrics of Illuminati, so you'll have to use your imagination. The track showcases a much different side to the band's sound, with the music sounding like a whimsical take on synth pop backed by an industrial beat. Admittedly, the song hasn't aged very well, but it's still a fun listen. Later on the record, we reach the band's magnum opus, at least in my opinion, Au Revoir. This is hands down my favorite Malice Mizer song. And its accompanying video is also great. The track has a very goth rock sound to it, with a grand piano and synth violin leading the song. Au revoir translates to goodbye, and the lyrics really reflect that.
Leaning on the window by the rustling trees, I softly muttered those same words once more. Even if I can see the figure from that time, at the most, it's only in a dream. Even more, I want to sleep holding you, even though sweet memories have changed. I want to sleep holding you in my arms, just like that time, that day, the two of us met.
Gackt, you write as well as you sing. Duty Vox sees a return to the band's experimentation with synth pop, and is quickly followed up by S Consciousness, where that synth pop sound goes full on industrial, with Gackt screaming over an admittedly cheesy beat. The whole thing sounds like a Ministry song made with Baroque samples. And while I want to laugh, I can't help but love it. The last song I'll talk about from this album is Le Ciel, a beautiful goth rock track that takes directly from the Robert Smith playbook. I mean, do I even need to say much? The vocals and music are absolutely incredible. Paired with the dynamic structure of the songwriting, Le Ciel easily ranks at the top of 90s Japanese rock. With this groundbreaking record, Malice Mizer ended up getting massive and started playing arena shows all across Japan, with a sprawling stage show accompanying them. Merveilles would go on to be certified gold by the RIAJ, selling well over 200,000 units. Malice Mizer would later headline Budokan, a massive Japanese music festival, with a performance later being released on DVD, again to critical and financial acclaim. Sadly, all this success would soon start to crumble, with Gackt leaving the band in January of 1999. No reason was ever given for his departure, but only a few short months after he left, he released his first solo EP. Not long after that, drummer Kami died from a subarachnoid hemorrhage, and from here the band began to run into trouble. In February of 2000, they would release a 3-song EP dedicated to Kami titled Shinwa. It was composed to the final tracks he helped write with the band. A beautiful and heartfelt send-off to their fallen brother.
次世代を担う注目のバンドを紹介していくこのコーナー、ポケショック戦歌。ナビゲーターは星子&アケミ。そして今月のゲストはマリス・ミゼ。メンバーはボーカルのクラハ、ギターのマナ、ギターのコージ、ベースのユウキ。92年、マナとコージを中心に結成。インディーズ時代からその独自のライブパフォーマンスなど。
From here we reach the final era of the band with their album Bara No Seidou. After releasing the Shinwa EP, vocalist Klaha would be recruited as the band's new vocalist. They would enter the studio and release their 4th record a year later, entitled Bara No Seidou. This would see the band return a bit to their gothic roots, opting to revert their fashion back to their more early look. This album has a very bad rep, and as much as I don't want to add on to the hate this record typically receives, it's definitely my least favorite. Klaha's voice is a bit flat and nasally, and the music at this point started to sound a bit uninspired. It's by no means terrible, and if you're into more typical goth music of this era, you'll probably enjoy it, but for me it's just not my cup of tea. And rather than sit here and try to describe and showcase an album I really just don't like, I'll give you a little medley of what you can expect from the record. As I said, it's not bad, just not my taste and a bit uninspired when compared to the band's previous work. Funny enough though, the band's most famous and honestly best songs with Klaha didn't even appear on the record. Those being Beast Blood, a track that got a second chance at life and received popularity thanks to its re-upload here on YouTube. And Garnet, my personal favorite with Klaha, and the band's swan song and heartfelt goodbye to the fans. Despite a successful tour, the album and its following singles didn't receive the same acclaim or fanfare as their previous work, and rather than going on to become yet another band that fades away, Malice Mizer opted to split in 2001, leaving behind a farewell message on their website, calling it a hiatus in order to leave out any mystery as to if they would ever come back together in the future. Malice Mizer would go on to do a few reunion shows, and members would begin other projects, but outside of Gackt, none would find the same success they had with Malice. Despite things really taking a turn for the worse and crashing after Gackt's departure, it's hard to see Malice Mizer as a fallen titan since they ended on their own terms, and sadly, that's just how things typically go when an iconic frontman leaves a group. Despite this, Malice Mizer has stayed relevant as one of the most influential and important bands that Visual Kei ever saw, and despite my dismissal of their final record, their discography really deserves a listen if you haven't heard it yet. They're one of my all-time favorite bands, and I can't recommend them enough to you. Also, Mana now runs a YouTube channel where he posts cooking videos dressed in character, and it's pretty great. But with that being said, subscribe, support me on Patreon, follow me on Twitter. I'll see you in the next video.
It's me, Madison Ray. Play up your pathetic little babe pitties.